We have big problems at these dollar stores, everyone. Their stock prices are crashing. They're down 50%. And worst of all, the low-income customers that come to shop at these dollar stores, they're no longer coming. CEO of Dollar General, he just came out and said that a lot of their customers who make $35,000 or less, they can no longer afford to shop at these stores. People come to dollar stores because they can't afford to shop anywhere else, and yet they can no longer even afford to shop at a dollar store. And here's a fun fact for you, everyone. Dollar General is actually the largest retailer in America by store count. They operate over 20,000 stores, by far number one. Number two is Dollar Tree and Family Dollar. They operate 16,000 stores. So between the two big dollar stores, they do 36,000 locations across America, which is insane. A store like CVS is only 9,000 locations. Walmart is only 5,000 locations. So the footprint that these dollar stores have is immense. And you can see over here, they're advertising even lower prices. And that's actually the big myth, everyone, is the fact that dollar stores used to be a place where you could go and buy things for cheap in America. You could actually buy things for $1 or less at a dollar store. Now you walk into one of these stores and everything costs $10, $15, $20. The dollar stores are no longer an example of a discount place where you can actually shop for cheap. And one of these big issues for the dollar stores now is that places like Walmart are actually cheaper to go shopping. Walmart has cheaper groceries and food than the dollar stores, which is one of the reasons why fewer people are going. And the result is the stock price of Dollar General is down 45% this year, while the stock price of Dollar Tree is down over 50%. So in case you think I'm somehow exaggerating here, folks, I mean, just look at the stock prices of these companies. They're down at basically the levels they were at a decade ago. So something fundamentally has shifted here. And I think a big problem is with also the US consumer. It's not just the fact that the dollar stores are expensive and have overexpanded. It's also the fact that the core customer that shops at these dollar stores can no longer afford to shop there. On one hand, because of inflation, because of the cost of goods going up. On the other hand, because people are running out of money. Dollar General's CEO said very specifically that their main customer makes less than $35,000 a year, and that in their surveys to them, they're seeing that they feel worse about their economic situation compared to 6 months ago, that they feel like their prospects for the future are declining rather than improving. And the result is that they can't buy as much when they go into the store. And you have to wonder about what this means for the economy in general, everyone. And this is something I've actually been thinking about. This dollar store collapse, what does it mean for the economy? And I think one thing it certainly cements is that the lower 1/3 on the income bracket is really tapping out and is really struggling. Like, the economy as a whole hasn't collapsed overall yet, but for the lower 1/3 on the income bracket, maybe those making $50,000 or less, certainly $35,000 or less, the inflation of the last 3 years is really coming back to bite. And now that the job market is slowing, now that the layoffs are increasing, now that the wage growth is stagnating, there just isn't room for those on the lower 1/3 of the income spectrum to grow their spending. They're starting to default on their credit cards. They're starting to default on their mortgages. We're going to look at some houses here in a second. And I think that's a really unfortunate aspect to this economy. There's so many people get deluded into thinking that things are good because the stock market is up. But for a lot of people, everyone, it is a really rough go out there. The personal savings rate in America just dropped to 2.9%. I've talked to you guys before about how this savings rate was in the mid 3% range. Now it's below 3%, 2.9% average savings rate, meaning that the average American only saves 2.9% of their income. This is the second lowest rate of all time. The only other times it's been this low was the 2007 bubble before the big housing crash, and then for a brief period in mid-2022 when inflation was 9%. The only two times in US history where savings rates were this low. It's not a good sign when Americans can't save. Think about what that means when Americans can't save, when the savings rates are at the lowest level on record. It means that people are living beyond their means. It means that the costs of day-to-day living continue to go up while the wages and the incomes aren't keeping pace. And I want you guys to understand that there's nothing sustainable about the current situation in the economy. People cannot continue to overspend beyond what they're earning. The only way you fuel that is with debt, and now the debt levels are just getting too high to sustain, especially with interest rates at the highest level in 20 years. Now, in response, a lot of people say this, everyone. They say, oh, the Fed's about to cut interest rates. Things are gonna get better once the Fed cuts interest rates. But this is a huge fallacy, because historically what tends to happen is that when the Fed cuts rates, it's more a signal that the labor market is about to get even worse. 11 of the last 14 times the Fed cut interest rate cycle, we had a recession in the next 6 months. The only 3 times we didn't have a recession in the next 6 months, the economic data was clearly saying the economy was getting better. In this case today, the economic data is saying that the economy is getting worse. And I tell you folks, I think they're cicadas. I don't know if you can hear them through my microphone, but they're these crazy bugs, which actually this summer in Tennessee, there was a cicada invasion, and it sounded like this all the time. The cicadas then went away, but now down here in Florida, we're seeing, I guess in some places the cicadas are back, or maybe they just live here all the time. I guess if you just live in one of these neighborhoods, you get used to hearing these bugs all the time. I'm not sure I would buy a house in a neighborhood overrun with bugs like this. Anyway, 11 of the last 14 times the Fed cut rates going back 70 years, we had a recession shortly thereafter. Why? It's because when the Fed shifts to cutting rates, it's because they see the economic picture getting bleaker and the labor market getting worse. Just today, we had a new jobs report from ADP, which said that private payrolls only increased 99,000 in August. That's the slowest private payroll growth that we've seen since early 2021. So we just had the worst private payroll report in 3.5 years. At the same time, the Bureau of Labor Statistics just announced that job openings dropped to the lowest level since early 2021. 7.6 million job openings in America, which now is about the same as the amount of unemployed people we have in this country, meaning that the labor market slack is building, and multiple data points are all confirming it. The Challenger Jobs Survey just came out and said that August 2024 was the biggest month for layoffs in August going back to 2009. Worst month for layoffs going back to 2009, according to the Challenger Jobs Survey. Worst month for hiring going back to 2005. And so, variety of different data points are now all coalescing from different sources, government, private, industry, are all coalescing around the notion that the job market is slowing and slowing big time. So I think that much is now confirmed, right? This isn't really a topic for debate. The question is what happens next? The optimists in the economy think that this will all just stop. They think that this is just a normalization back to pre-pandemic levels, is what the optimists say. Of course, those optimists 2 years ago were saying that we would not see any worsening in the labor market, but here we are, it's clearly getting worse. They keep moving the goalposts. Now they're saying it's just normalization. But now the pessimists, or should I say the realists, look at this and say, wait a minute, the employment picture is getting bleaker. We're in the biggest housing and stock bubble of all time. US debt is at the highest level of all time. Savings rates are at the lowest level of all time. That combination suggests that things are probably going to get worse before they get better. And I want to be clear, that's not a negative picture. That's a pragmatic picture. That's a pragmatic assessment of what's likely to happen into the future in the economy over the next year. And these things from Dollar General and Dollar Tree, they're just further warnings of what's going on. And for you as a home buyer and investor, the big takeaway I want you to get from this is that things are likely to get worse before they get better. In terms of employment, in terms of where asset markets go. Stock and housing, both at the highest level of all time relative to GDP. We've never seen a bubble like this before, actually, in terms of how big both the stock and housing bubbles are. It's increasingly likely that both are going to pop at some point and potentially crash. Stock market is 60% overvalued according to the Warren Buffett GDP indicator. The housing market is anywhere from 20 to 50% overvalued depending on which metric you use to benchmark it. So if you're buying a house or you're buying stocks, do so with the mindset that there could be some turbulence coming the next 1 to 2 years. And be prepared for that mentally and be prepared for that financially. I think now is a time where maintaining flexibility is of utmost importance. Financial flexibility, having cash on hand, to weather whatever storm comes and to also be able to capitalize on the opportunities that are going to come from the storm. I mean, we're seeing that down here in Florida right now. In this zip code, the median list price for houses is down anywhere from 5 to 10%. The inventory is spiking. Look at all the supply on the market here in Bradenton, Florida. That's a signal of the crash. That's a signal of the downturn that I'm describing happening before your eyes. And the skyrocketing inventory, folks, is really starting to lead to some pretty substantial price cuts on houses like the house here behind me here in Bradenton. This is a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house. 1,500 square feet. It was originally on the market for $399,000 3 or 4 months ago. It's been listed now for over 100 days, and they've cut the price down to $339,000. So that's roughly a $60,000 price cut, or a 15% reduction on the original list price. However, even with that price cut, it's still not selling, which shows you just how low the demand is here in Florida right now and across much of America. The mortgage applications to buy a house are at a 30-year low, and Redfin just released an article saying that while mortgage payments have fallen, home sales are still going down. Pending sales, according to Redfin, are down 8% year over year. And so you have listings like that just sitting on the market, particularly here because the inventory has gone way up. The number of price cuts, according to Reventure app, has gone way up. And you're gonna have to wonder, how much are these sellers gonna have to cut the price in a neighborhood like this before the buyers come back in? But I think what a lot of buyers do, everyone, is they look at that house and they see the fact that it sold for $111,000 in the early 2000s. And they see that the seller's still trying to triple their money. And they say, hey, this doesn't look right. I'm not going to pay $340,000 for a 1,500 square foot house. And I think more and more the sellers on the U.S. housing market are going to realize over the next 3 months that it's the price point that's the problem for buyers, not the mortgage rate. And the sellers that are going to be successful are the ones who realize that and go to market at a fair price. You know, if a home's in a good neighborhood and the seller markets it at a fair price, it will still sell. However, if a seller tries to bite off more than they can chew and ask for way too much for the house, it's going to sit on the market for 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, and the seller's going to have to cut the price by even more than if they had just listed it fairly to begin with. And I actually talked to a lot of realtors out there. And the number one complaint I hear from realtors down here in Florida is that the sellers who list a home with them just have crazy expectations about the price they can get. And often the issue from the seller's side is that the seller has a price and a net profit they want out of the sale. They've already baked into their head that they think their house is worth this, and they want, say, 200 grand after paying off their mortgage and paying their realtor fees and closing costs. And this is where a lot of sellers get into trouble, because in this zip code, and in much of Florida where inventory is skyrocketed, you cannot get the price that your neighbor got 2 years ago. And this is why the housing market tends to kind of be a slower downturn, so to speak, than say the stock market. I mean, the stock market could crash 50% in a year. The housing market will never do that, because in order for home prices to crash, incrementally, each new seller who comes to the market has to accept less and has to realize that the value of their house is not what they thought it was. And sometimes the only way a seller is going to realize that is by the home sitting on the market for a long time. And, you know, from the realtor, hopefully giving them some good advice on where to list the house for sale. And one thing I would actually recommend you do if you're a seller or a realtor, particularly, is go to Reventure app and use the data on Reventure app to help you price your house and help you understand the direction of the market that you're listing in. If you're in an area like this where inventory is exploded, we're at the highest level of supply in 10 years and sellers are cutting the price all over the place, list lower than market, list lower than comps, because that's the direction the market is heading. Conversely, if you're in a zip code where inventory is still in the basement, where price cuts are in the basement, you can feel more confident in listing high or getting the price that you want, because it's still a very competitive market. And all of this is actually baked into the Reventure app home price forecast score. This is a premium data point on Reventure app. Every zip code in America is ranked from 0 to 100. The closer you are to 0, the more it's a declining market. The closer you are to 100, the more it's an appreciating market. 50 is in the middle. Go on Reventure app right now and look at what the price forecast score is for your city and zip code under a premium plan.